Hey folks, if you've been watching Bonfire Man from the beginning, you know that when I first started this series, I was about 10 to 15 episodes ahead of whatever I was publishing to YouTube because I predicted that eventually the episodes would catch up to me because the cycle would take longer and longer to complete, and that has basically happened. So, no matter what, it's no longer going to be possible for me to put out one Bonfire Man episode per week because it takes significantly longer than a week for me to get one done. So given that I have to change the upload cadence anyway, I want to talk about my plans for the account, my plans for RuneScape, what I plan to work on, and what to expect from Bonfire Man going forward. So I have to admit to all of you that I was more than a little demotivated by Limpwert's recent video about his extreme one-chunk rule set and how he's about to approach his so-called death chunks. They're going to take him over a year to complete. The video kind of baits the idea that he might be considering a rule change, and then he dunks on anyone who has ever made a restricted iron account series in RuneScape that has involved rule changes. It's a very funny video. It's very on brand for Limpwert. I respect his tenacity and his ability to stick to his rules from the beginning. I will link it in the description. You should watch it even if you're not caught up on Limpwert's series. But it was hard not to feel a little called out by the video. He does basically say anyone who's ever changed their rule set is worthless.
I have a burning hatred for Iron Man series that keep adding rules here and there because they don't want to do this or they do want to do that. It ruins it for me.
And as you know, if you've watched Bonfire Man from the beginning, this has had a flexible rule set basically since episode 1. If you're still watching these, 45 episodes later, I assume that the rule flexibility hasn't bothered you very much, but I have run into people in RuneScape, like while mining shooting stars, who guess that I have a restricted iron series from my name having chunk in it, and then they ask, well, do you ever change your rules? And they say, I don't want to watch somebody who changes their rules. So I have this really bad dissonance now where I'm simultaneously really proud of this account, how much work has gone into it. I've spent about 1,200 hours on it now at time of recording. But also I detect a general cultural attitude in the RuneScape fandom around restricted accounts that what makes restricted accounts interesting is how much of a patience test they're willing to endure. It's not really about masochism, it's not about suffering, it's how much of a patience difficulty test can you pass, right? And I think that that is definitely a value of these series. I didn't play RuneScape until I watched Settled Swampletics series. That's what got me into it in the first place. And then I've watched Verf and Limpwert, and watching them endure truly heinous grinds is a big part of the draw for me. Now, I discussed my feelings of dissonance with my council of advisors for Bonfire Man, the folks who I run rule changes by, and said, hey, I feel kind of bad about this because I want to feel proud of my series, but I have this kind of pressure from the community saying that if you've ever changed your rules, your account has no integrity, it's not interesting, throw it away, right? And so Chaos Factor made a really interesting point. I'll show this chart here that he mocked up to kind of demonstrate why he sees Bonfire Man as being fundamentally different from something like Limpwert series or even Settled series. So this is describing Snowflake Iron series for RuneScape. On the x-axis, on the far left side, we have series that are about exploring the limitations of the game itself. And on the far right side, we have series that are about exploring the limitations of a player. You can think of all Snowflake Iron accounts as existing somewhere on this line, where on one extreme, you have extreme one-chunk accounts like Limpwert and Frosty Bard, where it's not really about the restrictions of the game world. It's not specifically about what can I do in my available chunks. It's all about what can Limpwert tolerate, what can Frosty Bard tolerate, how much of a grind can they withstand. And kind of in the middle are your more traditional region-locked accounts like Swampletics and Verf's Karamja account. There's definitely an element here of what can Settled withstand, what can Verf withstand, but the thing that really drew me to their series in the first place wasn't so much their pain tolerance as it was the routing, so to speak, of their series. Like the concept of if you're locked in Mauritania, the only way to train Slayer is to do temple treks, or the only way for me to get these items I want is to lamp Hunter until I can catch baby implings. That sort of question, what is possible in the game given some proposed set of restrictions, is really what drew me to wanting to make my own restricted iron account. And Chaos Factor, I think, accurately placed Bonfire Man even further to the left on this x-axis. I do think Bonfire Man does showcase some of that extreme patience difficulty testing that we like to see from the more intense accounts like Limpwert's, but it's less about showing how much I can withstand chopping thousands of regular trees and more about what can I actually do with this account. Chaos Factor then added a y-axis onto the chart with the top of the chart representing a very flexible rule set and the bottom of the chart representing a very strict rule set. So of course accounts like Limport and Frostybard go all the way in the bottom right. They're about the individual grind, and they're about strict adherence to the rules. Settled and Verf are still pretty close to the bottom of this chart, but because their series are more about what's possible in RuneScape, there are some exceptions they just have to make, otherwise they sacrifice an enormous amount of content. So they have to be able to unlock Herblore, even though according to their rule set they shouldn't be able to go to Taverley. And then there's a handful of other mid-series exceptions they needed to make just for the sake of the account having content, such as talking to NPCs outside of their restricted zone to be able to progress their quests, and picking up items like a saw to be able to train construction. So I think people don't bat an eye at those kinds of exceptions, and in fact, when Jagex themselves made their own restricted iron concept in the form of Leagues 1, 2, and 3, they borrowed this idea by pre-completing quests and pre-allowing access to certain items if you started your account restricted in a specific area. Now, obviously, these are mostly exceptions that are established at the beginning of the playthrough and are adhered to throughout, which is why I'm not putting Verf and Swampletics that much higher on the rules flexibility line. So what I'm getting at here is that you can think of there being different quadrants for Snowflake Iron accounts. There's the top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. I think the area RuneScape players really don't like is that top right area where somebody is very flexible with their rules, but their series is about how patient they can be. Because if the whole concept of your account is how willing you are to withstand inhuman grinds, it takes something away from it if you give up partway through. Personally, if Limport made it to the Calphite Queen chunk and then did the math on how long it would take him to get the pet and said, you know what, I'm not going to require pets anymore because I think they count as meme drop rates, I would have held nothing against him. I would have thought that was completely reasonable. But the series is significantly more entertaining for the fact that he did actually stick it out and get that drop. I would not fault him at all if he decided that any chunk that would take over a year to complete just isn't rollable for him until it would take less than a year to complete. But I respect him immensely for not making that rule change. That's because his account is about his personal patience to endure and not about what can you do with a chunk locked account in RuneScape. Bonfire Man is a concept, though, in comparison to like I'm locked to Mauritania or I'm locked to Karamja, so much more difficult to try to theory craft around ahead of time. You can use the wiki, you can use the chunk picker, but without actually playing the account and rolling the chunks, it's hard to know exactly what to expect mathematically from the mode. So the changes I've been making are more akin to like balance patches, as though Bonfire Man were a formal game mode that I were playtesting for the first time. I imagine that when Jagex was doing playtesting for Leagues 1, which was Enzia, and Leagues 2, which let the player choose which region they wanted to be locked to, it was only through that playtesting that they made balance adjustments to say, okay, if you start in this region, you have to start at these skill levels and with these quests already completed, otherwise this account doesn't make sense. So similarly, if somebody wanted to make a copycat Bonfire Man account, use the rules that I've developed, and just start in a different starting chunk, they would have a wealth of research and information to balance their rules properly in advance without having to make so many changes along the way. They would already know at the beginning of their series that there has to be a way to skip lighting the bonfire, there has to be a way to skip content in completed chunks, there has to be a way to get more XP out of thieving and agility. Otherwise, those skills are actually mathematically impossible and would not be able to progress the account in any way. So anyway, thank you to Chaos Factor for giving me that chart and that pep talk. It kind of helps me to understand that what I'm doing is fundamentally a very different kind of restricted account than the ones that I watch and enjoy, and that I shouldn't feel dissonant or called out about making rule changes, because making rule changes for me is kind of what the account is about. It's asking, how can this work? How can a concept of needing to be able to exhaust everything in an area and then resetting all of it, what do the restrictions actually need to be for that to be mathematically achievable? And for what it's worth, I do have one golden rule that I have never violated and will never violate, and that's that I'm never allowed to go back and retroactively get things that I should have gotten under the rule adjustment. So for hundreds of hours, I only ever tapped each pickpocketing NPC one time instead of pickpocketing them 28 times each in completed chunks. When I made the rule change, it says, you know what, I can pickpocket these guys more. I didn't say, well, technically I'm owed back pay of thousands and thousands of men to pickpocket. So since I'm not allowed to turn back the clock, I can make balance adjustments to the mode so that, somebody starting from scratch with the new Bonfire Man knows exactly what to do. But I don't get to retroactively make things way easier for myself. I did already endure the hard part of the grind. So that's the gist of it. I guess let me know in the comments if you think I'm completely off base, that you have seen your interest dwindling with rule changes, what you think about rule changes, whether you agree with chaos, that kind of a thing. it'll affect my motivation to keep doing this going forward. Either way, if you really, really hate it, let me know that you hate it and I will be free of it. If you think it's great, I'll enjoy continuing to pump these out. But on the subject of continuing to pump these out, like I said at the beginning of the video, we are now caught up on the backlog. I don't have a set of videos to publish every Sunday anymore. I have a few other things on the back burner that I've been wanting to check out. I really want to do a blind Iron Man playthrough of RuneScape 3. Because it sounds like playing as an Iron Man in RS3 removes a lot of the complaints that OSRS players have with it, and I think that a lot of OSRS players are kind of curious about what's going on over in that game, but don't want to sink in the hours to experience it for themselves. So I think if I can provide that fun service of giving my blind reaction to this game that's very different from old school RuneScape, as a person who's still relatively new to RuneScape as a concept, this is not a game that I played as a kid, right? I encountered it entirely in my 30s as an adult. I've also considered coming back to my blind OSRS Quest Cape account. So on that, I did complete the Quest Cape, the Diary Cape, and the Music Cape, and I'm very proud of having done that. I have a lot of content in the can that I never edited and put on YouTube of me working toward the Infernal Cape, but I've definitely hit a lot of those Iron Man walls there where I'm stuck grinding Corrupted Gauntlet for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours and don't really have content to share. So coming back to my main account, and if not doing the Infernal Cape, at least looking at the stuff that's been added to the game since I switched to Bonfire Man might be interesting. I want to check out Tombs of a Masket. I haven't done anything else from new quests that have been released. Eventually, I'd like to get back into a once-a-week upload cadence for something RuneScape related, whether it's Bonfire Man, RS3, or still working on my blind main account. Unfortunately, with Bonfire Man right now, as the series has been creeping up on me and I've been running out of backlog episodes, I've been feeling more and more compelled to just unhealthy gamer this game and do Bonfire Man every free moment that I have on the weekends and during the day. It hasn't gotten in the way of my real life in any way, but it has prevented me from doing some off-stream playthroughs that I wanted to wrap up for games that I played on my Twitch channel. There's a couple dozen hours of content I need to get out of Stardew Valley, Dwarf Fortress, and like Enter the Gungeon that I'd like to put on YouTube. So I think this will be the plan going forward. I want to continue going hard on Bonfire Man until we get to episode 50. I think that's a nice round number to end, we'll call it season 1 on. Season 1 was the season where we were putting out an episode basically once a week. And then whether I start working on RS3 or on my main account, I'm still going to try to put out one RuneScape related video per week-ish. And for season 2 of Bonfire Man, which will start a couple months after episode 50, we'll do an episode every 2 months or so. It seems like one episode every 2 to 3 months is a pretty standard cadence for a lot of these Snowflake Irons like Limpward and Settled. A lot of creators like Settled and Verf are maintaining multiple series simultaneously, and I think they do that partially to maintain their own sanity. And I'm going to try to use that as a motivating factor for Bonfire Man, that once I complete my Bonfire Man episode for the 2-month period, then I get to go check out more RS3 or work on my OSRS main account. So anyway, thank you for coming to this Limpwort response video. A normal Bonfire Man episode will be back next week, and then we'll do once a week until episode 50. After episode 50, I'm going to find some time to schedule a live stream of RS3 on my Twitch account. I started my blind OSRS playthrough with a live stream, and I kind of want to start RS3 the same way. Then I'm going to take a month or two to work on a couple other projects unrelated to RuneScape. We'll come back about 2 months after the publishing of episode 50 with episode 51 of Bonfire Man. And then in between Bonfire Man episodes, we'll do weekly uploads about RS3 or my OSRS main account. Thank you all for watching and supporting. It really does make this fun to do, and I appreciate all the kind comments you've left in these videos. It's really been nice having a comment section that isn't a toxic hellhole like it is for a lot of YouTube. Have a great week, and we'll be back with more Bonfire Man next week.